All right, it's 7:30. Time to get started. I'd like to call our meeting together and welcome you all to the Tuesday, October 11th, 2022 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. If you'd be so kind, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Yes, sir. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
All right, thank you. Do we have a motion regarding the meeting agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the ayes have it. We also have a proclamation to start our meeting, and Ms. Hiscott's going to do the honor regarding Energy Awareness Month. So, Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you. Whereas the City Council has adopted a resolution reaffirming the Council's commitment to take action to achieve the regional greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals developed by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and to continue to advocate for regional, state, and federal support to protect the environment. And whereas the vision of environmental sustainability in the City of Falls Church incorporates energy efficiency and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions as core values that embody what the city is striving to achieve. And whereas the Environment for Everyone chapter of the city's comprehensive plan identifies the reduction of energy use in buildings and transportation as a key action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And whereas October is National Energy Awareness Month, our annual national effort to highlight the importance of energy to our national prosperity and security. And whereas the first Wednesday of October is National Energy Efficiency Day, recognizing that energy efficiency continues to be the cheapest, quickest, and cleanest way to meet our energy needs and reduce utility bills for residential, business, and industrial users. And whereas addressing energy efficiency and clean local energy production promotes a cleaner environment, a more prosperous economy, and positive economic development, improved comfort and health in homes and businesses at lower cost, and a higher quality of life. And whereas energy efficiency and local energy production also support efforts to make our community more resilient to the effects of extreme weather events and climate change. And whereas the ESC's Energy Transition Subcommittee continues its leadership in encouraging energy efficiency and clean energy use in public buildings, businesses, homes, and transportation. And whereas guidance to make homes and businesses more energy efficient and produce local clean energy is readily available through the United States Department of Energy, the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council, the Energy Efficiency Day website, and the city's web pages.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim October 2022 as Energy Awareness Month, and do also proclaim Wednesday, October 5th, 2022 as Energy Efficiency Day in the City of Falls Church, and encourage staff, residents, businesses, and organizations to commit to take action this month and in the future to conserve energy and reduce carbon emissions. So do we have anyone who's going to be receiving this? All right, come on down, and you're welcome to say a few words. We'd love to hear from you. If there's anything you'd like to say, don't feel compelled, but thank you and welcome to you. Andy?
Thanks for the proclamation. I think there's a lot of environmental priorities for us to work on, and but energy use is one of the biggest. It has one of the biggest impacts for us. So appreciate your support.
Well, thank you and welcome.
And this is Andy Young, who's
Yeah.
our new-ish environmental sustainability coordinator.
Absolutely. So welcome aboard officially and formally, and we're delighted to be working with you going forward. There's a lot to do, and we've made a lot of progress so far, but miles to go before we sleep. So thank you for your leadership in advance. And if you'd like to come down and receive the proclamation, we'll do a quick photo as well. All right, let's move on. Any oaths of office to administer, Madam Clerk?
No, sir.
Okay, let's move on to the receipt of public comments, starting with a summary of written comments.
They're here somewhere. All right, so tonight, we had comments from Diane Duggan at 102 Lawton Street. She asked that current speed limits be enforced rather than lowering the speed limit. Leslie Rye of 214 Lawton Street said she was not sure lowering speed limits would increase pedestrian safety. The following provided comments in support of increased bicycle infrastructure: the Coalition for Smarter Growth, Aaron Flynn of Little Falls Street, Nathan Maines, Luther Swift, 217 North Lee Street, Varun Sharma of Falls Church, and Celeste Will. The following wrote to oppose tax incentives for a theater at Founders Row: Peter Clark of 1303 Robinson Place, Doug Green, 430 Park Avenue, and Kathleen Thompson, 502 West Broad Street. The following wrote to support the plan for a theater at Founders Row: Sabina Rajpal, 801 Parker Avenue, Gordon Thies, 802 Ridge Place, Austin Todd, 1003B Lincoln Avenue. In other comments, Diane Duggan of 102 Lawton Street wrote with concerns about noise in the church parking lot adjacent to her property. Stacy Evers of 819 Fulton Avenue asked council to oppose the governor's 2022 model policies on the privacy, dignity, and respect for all students and parents in Virginia public schools, as it is harmful to a vulnerable youth population. Anna and Mort Dworkin of 410 South Maple Avenue expressed concern about bollard and curb designs in the Park Avenue Great Streets project, which they believe would make a right-hand turn from Park Avenue onto North Maple difficult. That's what we have for this evening.
All right, Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Just a point of, I think, correction. I just skimmed through the public comments. I think the one from Ms. Erin Flynn is actually in opposition to the Founders Row and not in support of bike facilities.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks for that clarification. Let's move on now to the receipt of public comment. That's for folks in the room right now or on the web with us. Either or both are welcome to speak. If you'd like to speak, I'd ask that you pick up a slip in the hallway out front or the lobby. And looks like Mr. Young may be doing that right now. Fill that out, hand it to the clerk, and when your name is called, if you could, please keep your comments to 3 minutes and state your name and address for the record. Madam Clerk, will you call the first speaker?
Yes, first we have Joe Wetzel from Falls Church Arts, and then followed by Joseph Shirizzi.
All right, welcome.
Push. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of council. I'm Joe Wetzel, Falls Church Arts. We're 700B West Broad Street. I'm the founder and president of Falls Church Arts, and I'm here to remind you to get out of here. Go wander the streets, because for the 12th year running, Falls Church Arts has organized the Great Halloween. Ooh, that's sound effects. Paint-In, where working with the community and merchants up and down West Broad Street, other areas in the city, we've organized young troops of painters in varying ages and sizes, none of them any higher than this, I think, to take over the city and give the whole city a Halloween flair and favor. And it's bigger this year than it ever has been. We've had 51 groups descending on the city. And I got to tell you, the work this year is, some of it knocks your socks off. So if you haven't gotten out, you need to do it now, because like all great art, it's ephemeral and it's here today and gone tomorrow. And this especially, because these are paintings that are done on the outside of the glass. So if it rains, you've missed your chance. Get out there, stop in the merchants and tell them how much you love it, because we need their canvases next year if we're going to continue this again. So enjoy, thank the merchants, and thank you all.
All right, well, thank you. We look forward to seeing that art. I think I've seen some of it already. So, Madam Clerk, next speaker.
Yes, Yes, we have Mr. Joseph Shirizi, followed by Robert Young.
Good evening. I'm Joseph Shirizi from 321 Gundry Drive, Falls Church, and my comments this evening do not represent any organization. They're just from me. I want to just take a minute to thank the council for last council meeting, because I didn't get a chance to say thank you at the end for the very long amount of time that you spent listening to the more than 30 members of Bike Falls Church that came out in support of bike lanes. I thought it was a very special event to have that much community and civic engagement. I've never been a part of anything where so many people care so strongly about such a local issue that's so important to them. So I thought it was very special. A few things, coming out of that, I can see, it's really had a big effect. I feel like we've changed the course of history, and I want to thank the council for taking our comments seriously. A few of the city council responses and, public policies going on right now involve sharrows on roads, which are painted pictures of a bicycle with an arrow in front of it on the middle of the road. And so it's like a shared arrow, sharrow. And I just want to point out that at the previous city council meeting, 0 people requested or asked for sharrows. Everybody basically asked for protected bike lanes that we feel safe, that our kids can get to school safely in. And if you wouldn't let a 12-year-old walk in the bike lane, then it's probably not safe for them to bike in because the danger is the same. So I hope you'll take that seriously. And I don't think that adding sharrows to Park Street or anywhere else is a conducive compromise. I think it's an admission of defeat, because it means that we haven't separated the bikes, we haven't separated the cars. And this evening, at a time when we just had, an energy proclamation, and the largest line item in the energy reduction goals that this council has agreed to with the regional emission goals, the largest line item for emissions and energy use is from transportation. And the only way to lower that is to get people out of cars. And the only way to get people out of cars is to help them meet their daily needs without needing a car. And that means better buses, better bike infrastructure, and dozens and hundreds of residents of Falls Church want to be able to bike and walk to meet their daily needs, but don't feel safe doing so because we still lack safe, protected bike lanes that make it easy to get to schools, to get to grocery stores, etc. So thank you for taking the comments seriously, and I appreciate your time this evening.
All right, thank you, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. Madam Clerk?
Yes, Bob Young.
I'll wait until the item comes up.
Thank you.
All
He'll
right.
wait till the item comes up.
I heard. All right, is there anyone else who'd like to speak at this time, either here in person or on the internet? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to council requests. Are there any council requests? Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Actually, it is a request. Starting at 7 p.m. at Meridian High School was a public session on the bus rapid transit project and Vision Route 7. And it's being recorded. I made a couple comments at the beginning. Definitely skip by those and watch the presentation. It's really hopefully the beginning of actually getting a project done this time. So it's an exciting project, and it will be well worth watching, and I'll get more information out to folks when it becomes available. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Ms. Hardy, and then Ms. Hiscott.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schneider. I actually had the same request because we were missing the BRT meeting. We were in the Housing Commission, which was meeting at the same time. Could we actually just get a briefing for council? It was probably good for all of us to just hear from them and how we can engage and what the next steps are.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, that's in the works. So yes, thanks.
Thank you.
Ms. Hiscott?
Yes, I have a request if we haven't already echoed our support for the superintendents in the region who have clearly stated that they are going to continue to show respect for all students in all of our schools. I don't know if we, as a general government, have provided support. Perhaps I missed it, but if we haven't, I'd like to make sure that we do. Thank you.
All right. I think there's probably support up here from all of us for that. So.
I would second that.
Yeah. So, Mr. Shields, why don't you maybe see if you could put something together for our consideration? Was there another comment done this way? Okay. Anything else? If not, let's move on to the report of the city manager.
Well, thank you, Mayor Tarter and members of council. I'd like to take time during the manager's report tonight to share with the community progress on the council 2-year work plan. We'll do a consolidated update on the CIP and the work plan, and then I'd like to turn it over to Claire Casey, who will provide an update for the community on the city's progress on meeting the recommendations or following through on the recommendations of the Use of Force Review Committee. So if I do have a few slides just to help with the review of the City Council work plan. And for the community's awareness, the City Council went through a strategic planning process and then engaged with staff, and then staff and council together identified 67 initiatives that we would seek to accomplish over the 2-year planning period. This is a little bit of a larger work plan than we've typically had in the past, but we also have more detailed projects in that 67 initiatives as well. We've tried to provide this report in a very concise template, and 45 are shown as green or on track, and 22 are shown as yellow or not yet started. And some of those are per the sort of the Gantt chart in the council work plan, where they're intended to be started in the second half of the 2-year planning period. We also have 11 capital projects that are in process. There are many more that are in the sort of further out stage, but the ones that are being actively worked right now, we provide an update on those as well. And 9 of those are on schedule, and 2 of those are experiencing delays. So I'm going to touch on just a few of the highlights, and starting with the capital projects, and a lot of those are in the area of safe and complete streets, which we had a speaker on tonight, and there's been a lot of comment on in recent council meetings. So I'll spend a little bit of time on those. But these are the big areas of focus in the council work plan, and those are aligned with the city council's, with the city's adopted comprehensive plan. And so that's a helpful way to organize the initiatives that we want to undertake over the 2-year period to advance progress in each of these 7 areas of interest and areas of focus that are identified in the comp plan. Next slide. So in the area of capital improvements, new sidewalks, some that will be completed between now and the end of this year, include a new sidewalk up to the Tenner Hill Historic Site and the continuation of the South Maple new sidewalks. We did the graphic there is the sidewalks that were done on a portion of South Maple, and we'll continue that through from Wallace Street to Tenner Hill Road. In addition, staff will be coming to council in the November timeframe to discuss the use of the $1.4 million of ARPA money that the council allocated for sidewalk improvements and bus shelters. And we'll come to you with a plan to expend those dollars on sidewalk improvements across the city. Next slide. Bike facilities. This is just a graphic of the city's existing bike master plan. We're engaged now with the Virginia Tech student study led by Ralph Bueller that will look at best practices around the world for bike facilities and apply those in a small suburban setting like the city of Falls Church. And then with that input from the Virginia Tech process, then staff will work with the community to update the bike master plan. So that's one of the deliverables that is in the 2-year work plan that is underway. Next slide. The Park Avenue Great Streets project, that is at the 60% plan development stage at this point, and we will be circling back with the community on the input that we got from the walking tour that occurred earlier this fall. Next slide. A project that will get underway this spring is the replacement of the Oak Street Bridge. And whenever we replace infrastructure, we always add pedestrian facilities, this being right next to the Oak Street School. We'll see wider sidewalks, protected crosswalks, and this is the conceptual plan for that project. That is being administered with grant dollars and is being administered by VDOT in the city. Next slide. Traffic calming, the main effort in traffic calming right now is the Greenway Downs traffic calming project. We're working with community right now. We'll be having meetings in November to review the proposals, and they sort of would encompass all of the streets that tie in to South Washington Street, from Rosemary down to West Westmoreland, and taking a holistic view of that whole neighborhood, so that if we take measures on one street, it doesn't push traffic over to another street. Next slide. We'll also be coming back to City Council later this fall to consider an ordinance, to bring an ordinance before City Council on 20-mile-per-hour speed zones on residential streets throughout the city. And we'll also provide an update to the City Council on Photo Red, extending to additional intersections, and the results of the speed camera study that was done in September. Next slide. Shifting over to the stormwater area, the City Council approved just last week the contract for the Trammell Branch stormwater project, and the contractor is mobilizing now, and that will extend a wider outfall basically from the Shadow Walk area. We've already built the extension underneath the WNOD trail, and the larger outfall then will go down the length of the WNOD trail to the 4-mile run, and reduce flood potential or the likelihood of flooding in the Shadow Walk and West Columbia neighborhoods. So those are some of the CIP updates, and then I'll just very quickly go through a couple of other things that the council may not be aware of in terms of progress. One, in the area of the Fellows Property Master Plan, the Rec and Parks Board is wrapping up their recommendations, and those will be brought to the City Council. We're aiming for December for a presentation of the Fellows Park Plan. We are working with CPEDS and DPW on just to do an engineering feasibility study on the parklets to assess ADA and other elements like that. We think that feasibility review will be completed in the next 3 weeks, and we'll be circling back on the process for which the parklets, which the EDA is recommending to use some of its ARPA allocations, $900,000 of which for 3 parklets in the city. The schedule for the transition zoning code amendments, which is related to areas that are between our more dense and more active commercial zones and our lower density residential zones, the transition zones, that's being reviewed by the Planning Commission now. We will have a public input session on November 2nd of 2022, and we're expecting that the Planning Commission will wrap up its recommendations to the City Council by the end of this calendar year. A couple other highlights just to touch on in the work plan. I will note that the LED streetlight conversion, that pilot was one we did get a lot of comment on those. We'll be looking at those comments, give a report to the City Council, but we are intending to move forward with a full citywide conversion to LED streetlights in our residential neighborhoods beginning this winter and continuing in through the summer. The Community Energy Plan and the Government Energy Plan, which Mr. Young mentioned briefly in his comments, We are finalizing our contract with COG to assist us with that work, and look forward to engaging with the community on those plans in the coming months. The project of the greening of Lincoln, we have hired an engineering firm to work with us on the concepts for that plan, and we will begin engaging with the neighborhoods around Lincoln Avenue soon to discuss both the stormwater aspects or the bioretention aspects of that project, as well as traffic calming on Lincoln. The last things I will note, we do have the employee compensation and after that, the city staffing plan. The compensation study is being wrapped up now, and we'll have the results to the council, we think, in the November or December timeframe, and then we'll engage in the staffing study and hope to have the results of that for to help inform FY 2024 budget development. The revenue sharing agreement was reviewed, just the history of it and the methodology of that was reviewed by the City Council at work session 2 weeks ago, and we'll use that as a document to help inform staff and council members and school board members as we go forward. And then lastly, I will note on the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the city, that is planned for this August, and we do need to put together a team to begin working on things we want to do for that celebration. Some of the advanced lead time things would be, I think, reaching out to our delegation at the state government to potentially have a resolution from the General Assembly and from Congress to note that milestone for the city. But we'll have, obviously, many other events. But that's one of the more long lead time things that we want to get on now. So those are some highlights, and happy to answer any questions on the CIP or the work plan. And I do want to just thank all the staff that have been obviously working very hard on these. It's a very ambitious plan. But the work plan also is very helpful for staff to prioritize what's important for the community and have good alignment between what staff is doing and the expectations of the governing body. Cindy Mester does take our lead on many of our planning for the capital programs, so any questions you might have on that, she can jump in to answer as well. I'd be happy to stop there for questions, or we could go to the report on the Use of Force Review Committee and then have all questions at the end, whatever the council's preference is on that.
Why don't we go ahead and just keep going, and we'll have
Okay.
questions as they come.
Sure. Well, let me invite Ms. Casey forward, and she has some good things to report as well, and then we look forward to any questions or comments from council.
Good evening, Council. I'm Claire Casey, the Administrative Deputy Director for the Falls Church Police Department, and I'm here to give the regular progress report on the Use of Force Review Committee's recommendations. I think you have our full progress report in your agenda packet, so I'll just give you the highlights. We'll start with our general orders. The Use of Force Review Committee recommended improvements to managing and reviewing all of our general orders, which are basically our policies for major operational and administrative roles. In July of this summer, we did finish our major update to the General Orders Manual. There are 149 general orders in total. We had an internal policy group that reviewed and revised all of these. And it took a while just because of the sheer amount of content for us to, edit and revise and look at. Also, we did a staggered issue so that all of our officers could take the time to review and acknowledge them, especially take the time with some of our high priority topics. The other big update with our general orders is that we have a new system to manage it. We have a third-party vendor called Lexipol that's all online, so there's no more hard copy manuals of the general orders floating around. Everything is digital. This is way more efficient, obviously, for updating and circulating edits to general orders, but also for officers to review. They can just pull up their cell phone or a computer and access them at any time. The feature I'm most excited about with this system is that Lexipol will notify us whenever there's a major state or federal code or law change, when we need to make an issue or a reissue to a general order for any edits. So we don't have to go hunt and find if there are any new laws or changes that we need to make officers aware of. We're happy with how the manual turned out. It's available online on the city's website for the public to review in total. Our next steps are to basically do the same thing with our procedural manual and to start the re-accreditation process. I do want to give a big thank you to our Senior Administrative Assistant, Carly Lumpson, who was essential to this process and will be very important going forward with maintaining and updating both the manuals and all of our policies in the future. Keeping with the general orders, one of the most critical general orders, even outside of the scope of the UFRC recommendations, is the use of force general order. This general order was a high priority for us to update, not only to adhere to any changes to state or federal code that's happened in the last decade, but also just to incorporate the national dialogue and the climate with police brutality across the nation. The UFRC's 8th recommendation was solely about last resort tactics, and we included their guidance in this revision process. We now have specific sections on prohibited tactics, deadly force applications, and duty to intercede and report. And again, the public can find that on the city's website. I believe it was an attachment in your packet, and you can review at any time. Finally, we gave an update on the special circumstances and vulnerable populations recommendation. We gave specific updates on our focus with youth and students in the community and our safety protocols with them. I'm going to speak just to the school resource officer portion of that report. I can safely say on behalf of the police and probably for FCCPS, the public school system, that we're very excited to have an SRO back at the high school at Meridian after a few years hiatus, both in terms of because of the pandemic and our own staffing and resources. The new SRO is Sergeant Darian Chukalongwe, or Chuk, as you may know him. He's been with the police department for over 9 years. He's crisis intervention trained. He's very well known in our community, and I know he'll bring more than just a safety security presence to the schools. He'll be a good mentor and a guider to our both students and staff. I also have one additional SRO development that didn't make the report. We recently applied for a grant towards funding for an additional SRO, and we found out late last week that we got the grant and we'll be able to provide an additional SRO to support the middle and elementary school students. So we're very excited about that, and it's early timing on it, so we don't know when, but probably by I'd say winter term, I hope we get them in place. So it's good news. But very brief update. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you for that fine presentation. Let's go to questions or comments from council. Ms. Hiscott?
Thanks so much, Claire, and to everyone for all of their work on this report and continuing to do the work since just a year and a half ago, I guess, when the use of force was provided this document. Anyway, sorry, the question I had was on a regional issue that came about, and that's with providing, there were other jurisdictions that were going to have mental health professionals that were going to be working. They're piloting a couple, maybe in Alexandria or some other areas that we were going to kind of watch and see how it went. And I do believe that there might have been some challenges there. Just wondering if you have any update as to what went well or what we may or may not be able to see following in the future in Falls Church City.
I will let Chief Gavin.
I would say she looks ready to go. Thanks.
So the co-responder program, we had got into a study with Fairfax County. Fairfax County has initiated, but they only had one co-responder for the county with no expectation of covering the city. Fairfax City has just been approved. Their council had just approved actually a co-responder program for the next 3 years. They're building up a program. Today, we met with Dana Lewis to talk about how to establish a partnership with a clinical psychologist here in the city. So we'll have a meeting actually scheduled for October 26th to discuss how we can create some type of beginning of a co-responders program. May it be telehealth or working directly with somebody that is here in the city, because it doesn't appear that Fairfax County's program is going to be able to accommodate us. It sounded like what they wanted to do if they were called here if they had the time, that they would take the call over rather than having somebody helping us in the police department. And we weren't certain we wanted to go there, have Fairfax County Police come in and take care of our calls for service. So I'm excited about working with Dana and getting to the next steps and seeing what that looks like for us. And we also are closely watching what's happening in Fairfax City and how they're building their program.
Great. Thank you so much for all of your work, and keep us posted on how we can help. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. So working backwards, so thank you, Chief. Thank you, Ms. Casey. It's like Debbie said, it's really great to see that we're continuously updating the status of this. So out of all the recommendations that came from the Use of Force Review Committee, like what percentage do you think we've kind of gotten through now and what's left?
I would say we're probably through 80%. I think we have about 20%, but I think it's going to be a living document. I think it's going to be a framework for at least the next 2 years for always continually trying to improve upon certain aspects, obviously with the policies, and that will be always changing. But I think, this is a framework that's going to be something that we could be shooting for, and we do. Each quarter, we sit around and ensure that we're making the target points of the 10 recommendations. But I'd say we're 80% there and touching all of them, if not completing them all, and then having a plan forward how to just continually improve.
Great. And I think that continuous improvement mindset is so important, and I know it's a big part of the police culture that you're leading, so thank you for that. On that note, maybe it'd be good to circle back with the review committee and let them know where they stand, because I think we are really fortunate to have gotten so many good recommendations, especially so many people with actually professional expertise. We should let them know, like, hey, based on your recommendations, here's where we are, here's updates. I think it would be really fulfilling for them. Second point is I loved actually seeing the community policing updates in the report around the walking beats, the SRO updates. Keep that up, because that is something that we continue to hear from the community, that they like to see our police in the community and not just responding to calls for service. So that's certainly appreciated. Thank you.
All right, other comments or questions about the work plan, about what we just heard? Mr. Snyder?
A question on the police use of force order. Do the rank and file of the police department support this? Do they believe that it gives them adequate protection, as well as, of course, protecting the community at large?
Yes. Of course, we've had many heart-to-heart conversations in our roll calls throughout the past 2.5 years, even obviously before the George Floyd incident. And you have a very responsive police department. One, we have a young group that are that easily trained, because they're learning the job, but they're very enthusiastic, and they understand the fact that the authority that's bestowed upon them in their job is the authority of the community, and we reinforce that with each and every swearing in, with each and every roll call where we do talk about the use of force and how it's applied. With each and every use of force, they are examined and investigated, and officers are given feedback, anywhere from handcuffing somebody to, obviously, where we have to go hands-on and actually wrestle with somebody or use a taser or at least less than lethal force. But they're all on board. They all have been instructed on, in the case of a worst-case scenario, what the scenario will play out and how it will play out, in the sense that officers, when they're involved in any type of use of force where there is deadly force involved, that they will be criminally investigated as well as internally investigated. So they understand the process. They understand their responsibilities, and they also understand their authority, and the authority lies with the community.
Right, and do they feel it gives, that the balance is right in that it gives them enough ability to protect themselves and the communities against violent criminals?
We've not only given them the policies that are firmly supported by Lexapol and all of the command staff, we've also given them equipment the equipment that you all have purchased or authorized us to purchase in terms of less than lethal equipment, giving them every instrument we can to provide de-escalation. May it be the taser, the bowler wrap, the ASP, the vests that they wear down to the cruisers that they drive. They have a lot of great equipment that puts them in a position of advantage and gets them to a place where they can, de-escalate things. And I think we showed that to you in a body-worn camera incident. The training that they get is top of the line. So they do feel very secure, and they feel very secure in telling me when they don't have something that they need, which is really important to me, to kind of figure out what it is that's missing or that they feel as if they need, because we want them to feel secure, safe, because when they feel secure and safe, they make the public a lot safer with their tactics and or just convincing the public to agree or to cooperate and or to de-escalate a situation.
Great, thank you. And just a comment in support of the SROs. When my daughter graduated from high school, they elected their SRO as their commencement speaker. So that gives you some idea about the importance of the role that the SRO plays in terms of bringing that element into a very positive relationship with the students. So thanks for bringing that program back and, in fact, expanding it. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Conley.
Thanks, Mayor Charter. I'll just pick up on the SRO, which is he's amazing, and he's doing a great job in our high school. He's making connections with students. I'm sure people have seen the tweets and stories in the morning announcements about him playing football and basketball at recess and lunchtime and really making connections. So he is a great addition to the staff at the high school.
I cannot speak highly enough of Sergeant Chukalongwe in every way, and I'm happy for him and his family. He's on maternity leave right now, paternity leave, but he will be back soon.
Oh, my original comment I wanted to make is that to go through these two things, it makes me so proud to be a city council member in Falls Church. There's so much going on here in Falls Church, and there's so many check marks and so much progress that we're making. So I want to thank all the staff and all of you here and those who aren't here for really working on all of these things, because there's so much here that we're covering. So thank you for that. And then Wyatt, I didn't forget about the questions I have for you, even though we've moved on to the police. When you talk about, there's a sidewalk program in there and making sure that we're reaching our underserved areas, which include Tinner Hill and also the area around Kent Street and Irving, where we need connections to connect up to Parker because there are no sidewalks there. I'm just wondering, what's the status of the Kent Street and Irving Berman Park project? I don't think that's on here officially, but I know it's in our CIP.
It is listed, and let me ask Ms. Mester just to give us an update on that. We call that the Berman Park project.
Yep, let me.
Oh, I see it. It's number 11 under.
Yeah, so our
Under-
plans are 60% complete, and right now we're looking at the cost estimates and working through VDOT, because the cost estimates are showing higher than the budget, of course. So we're looking to see what additional funding we can reallocate versus having to reduce scope, but we are at 60% and proceeding.
So has the neighborhood seen that? What does 60% mean?
That hasn't gone back out to the community because we're just doing the engineering review and working with VDOT.
Okay.
And we need to make sure we can fund it and, not over-deliver expectations if we have to scale back.
Okay. And I just want to put in a plea to ensure that there are sidewalks added on those streets so that people can get from those apartments to main roads safely without having to walk in the road.
Yeah, we'll follow up with the project manager on that.
Okay. My second question has to do with the neighborhood traffic calming program. And I see item number 3, update the neighborhood traffic calming program procedures to incorporate lessons learned in recent projects. And you mentioned the Greenway Downs project, which happens to be where I have lived for many years. And there's been a little bit of a bumpy process there with getting neighborhood feedback and ensuring that there's equal access to all of the neighborhoods because of the volunteers that have been charged with doing this and their different expectations and how they want to do it and how they want to reach out and their time available. So I do think that it's really important to, as we're reviewing the Greenway Downs specifically, but also because we're going to review the whole program, we really need to take into account some of the people that were asking to help, who one neighbor said to me, well, I signed up to help. I had no idea I had to do all this. So just that, so if the people who are signing up to help don't know what the scope of their work is, then it's hard to make sure we're getting feedback from all of the neighbors.
Yeah, that's good feedback from Greenways Down, which is sort of more than an NTC, but not quite
Right.
CIP. But we also got similar feedback when we did South Oak and South Lee. So that's part of looking at the process is what can be administrative, light, how to smooth the community engagement piece, what's the community's role and what's the staff. So that's
So that
helpful
one-
feedback.
That one's, we're going to begin talking about that this month. And how long do you think that's going to take to, that took a while to review last time we did it.
Yeah, the CICT's had some good conversation, and it's not a simple,
Right.
fix. So I think we need to allow enough deliberation. In the meantime, we're going to try to make sure the projects that we are actively working go smoothly.
Okay.
And the Greenway Downs, there's been some recent communication today and this week, and so that one will bring the community back together mid-November to make sure everybody, and we're going to be doing yard signs and direct mailing and a lot more community outreach to make sure we can move that one smoothly forward as we
Right.
look at the overall process.
I think part of the problem is that the neighborhood doesn't understand how long it actually takes.
Yes.
So they see something and then they're happy or unhappy with what they see, and they don't understand that there's 5 more steps in the process and that they have an opportunity for input. So just even explain to the neighborhood the scope of how long it's actually going to take, I think is, and how many opportunities they have to speak.
Yeah.
I think that'd be
Helpful
helpful.
feedback, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And then my last question is about the 75th Anniversary Committee. As you can imagine, I'm very interested in that one. And I know other people in the community who are also interested in serving. So I just want to make sure that whenever a chair is appointed or however this is assembled, that there's opportunity for people from the schools and also from the community to jump in and help out as well.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Shields, too, if there are any dates we're floating around, I would suggest doing that sooner as opposed to later because that's holiday season. If it was going to be August, a lot of folks plan vacations. Yes, of course.
Mr. Shields, are there plans to do watch night this year or not? Or where are we on that?
Let me get back with you. I know that that's important, and let me get back with you on that, on
Okay.
what we have on that.
Yeah, I'd just say get back to us soon, and I hope there are plans for that. It's certainly something we've been talking about for many months, and so I'm hopeful that you'll have some exciting news for us in the very near future about Watch Night this year. All right, other comments? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Well, the chief is here. I wonder, could I ask a practical matter question? It's at the intersection of your all's relationship with Human Services and with winter coming up. Some of the folks who have housing issues in the community, are served by the emergency homeless shelter. Last winter, there was an individual who I was told about who spent, even though he had a job in one of the city's businesses, spent the winter sleeping in his car because he, just didn't feel like he was a candidate for the emergency shelter. So my question is, I guess, when you run into folks who are service resistant and cold weather is, upon us, how do you all deal with situations like that with human services folks?
Well, oftentimes they are service resistant, and it makes it difficult because we can't force them to do anything. But there are times when the weather is so bad that the officers will actually either call HHS to get support for shelter. If our shelters are full, go to Fairfax County shelters, and/or it's been known that we've gotten them hotel rooms to get them through some really hard times. But there are people out there, obviously, who are service resistant and do not refuse service, do not want our service or refuse service. But the ones that we know, that we continually check to make sure that they're okay and they're safe. But it's like officers like Chukalongwe who have actually gone out of their way to ensure that they get hotel rooms and goodie bags and things like that to get them through.
So if situations like that were to arise, what's our first outreach, to Human Services or to you all? Or, if the mercury is dropping precipitously and we don't have time to wait for,
I would say if it's someone you see out on the street, you could call our dispatch and we could get somebody to do a welfare check.
Mhm.
And then we would make a referral to HHS to ensure that they do a follow-up if they were resistant. And then all the shifts would know. Each call for service goes out and they share amongst these shifts, so we know exactly what calls for service each other are going on. And then they would do a check to make sure the person was okay. But that's pretty typical of our seasonal checks, that when we know somebody is in a certain area, they know that we're going to come checking on them. And we usually try and do bug them to get them into some shelter.
Mhm. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, other comments? Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I wanted to get back to the work plan. My first set of questions was just for the police. Thank you, Wyatt, for this. I echo Mary Beth's comments. I think the breadth of work in this work plan really is impressive. I think this is my 5th work plan now, and just seeing the amount of the diversity and also the breadth of work, I really appreciate staff's focus on this. Starting from the top, I wanted to talk about Park Avenue. So in light of the 27 comments we heard at our last meeting about bike facilities on Park Avenue, I want to make sure we are being responsive to that and considering options. Where are we with kind of considering alternatives to what's been presented so far? Because I want to make sure that it's going to be 6+ years away. And by then, I think the focus will be on de-emphasizing cars where possible. And if there's an opportunity now to think about incorporating stronger bike facilities in the plan, I want to make sure that we think about that before we finish 60% design. Do we have an update on where we are, when we might be able to see options?
So we will be shifting towards the kind of the technical part of the power line undergrounding, and that is a block of time that kind of worst case that could take multiple years. We're hoping it will not take as long as we've charted it out. So what staff has been in discussions with VDOT about is a bike boulevard, which would be a shared use space, 20 miles per hour, and kind of the full design to allow on-street parking, but also to have, I think, a stronger sense of bicycles belonging on the street than your typical Shero, and doing that through design and also surface treatments and the like. That is, when we're listening to the community and sort of the passion on both sides and the limits of the right-of-way, we think that is actually a very progressive and workable solution. So that's what we're working on with VDOT, to kind of get those plans in a shape where we could bring those back and have a presentation on those.
Okay, thank you. I think Bike Boulevard gets us closer, but I think it's essentially a super share, right? It's still cars mixed in with traffic, and looking at the volumes that we see on Park Avenue, I think there are a couple of incremental design changes along those same lines that would get us closer. So one would be the color and texture change on Park Avenue to really define that it's a different space. I know we've talked about alternatives to brick pavers, so that might be a good opportunity for us to pilot or think about something like that on Park Avenue. Another idea is getting rid of the double yellow, because again, it defines it as a unique space. It's really, cars are slightly lower on the priority list then.
That's
and It's
right.
pedestrians and bikes. And so I think there's things like that feel very doable and realistic compared to creating a separate bike lane. So I would love to see us think about changes like that, especially when we're thinking designing. This is going to be for a 2028 implementation. So thank you. I look forward to seeing those options. Tree lights, which I was going to bring up. I was slightly disappointed and surprised that the lights are only going to Broad and West when I thought they were going to be going to Haycock. Is that just an error, or is that an opportunity for us to actually get them all the way to the border of the city?
Let me check on that. I may have written that wrong. Because I do recall them actually going to Haycock, but I recall writing going to West. So let me confirm that.
You really don't want me asking another 6 years for this, so.
Yeah, let me get back with you on that. I may have just written that wrong in
Okay,
this report.
thank you. That's what I hope it is. On sidewalks, I love seeing the priority and the dollars that we put against it. I forgot it was 1.4 million between sidewalks and key obstruction removals. I echo Mary Beth's comments to kind of think about kind of where we have underserved areas. But in general, I think having the CACT help us look at the missing links map and prioritize across the city, have that global view is really important, because I'm sure we all individually can come up with, oh, this street really needs a sidewalk or this street really needs one. But if we look at kind of where there's high pedestrian traffic, where there's big community facilities, that'll probably be a really good way to prioritize those dollars, because I know 1.4 million does not go as far as we think it will. Thank you. Broad Street multimodal. Between the multimodal work and the Hawk signals, both of those say IFB. What does that acronym mean?
So invitation for bid. So that's when the plans are set and you're going out to market.
Okay, so that means we're close then if we're going to get bids and then construct.
Yeah. So when you're in IFB, that's a good milestone.
So just hearing chatter in the community, I think those two changes on Broad Street are probably one of the most anticipated between speeding and volumes that we've seen. What's our sense of construction timing for both of those projects, the Hawks on Broad and the multimodal changes?
I'm looking to Cindy on the latest dates on that.
And the reason I ask, because we have obviously active construction, private construction projects happening in both ends of the city. Is it going to essentially overlap with any of that? And I think if so, we probably want to have good management plans around what that might be.
Yeah, the Broad Street multimodal construction is 23 into 24, and Hawk will be similar, starting a little sooner. And it'll have to be coordinated with the construction and so forth. A lot of that is timed because it's VDOT money, so all the procurement and contract awards get signed off by VDOT.
Okay, thank you. Last two, T-zones. So we've talked about last time, besides the public engagement sessions, if it's possible to kind of do pop-ups in those T-zone areas, whether it's just having engagement out there or just yard signs. In Housing Commission, Caroline and I were just in the T-zone presentation. I think out of the 25 acres of T-zones, once you actually take out the acres that aren't actually going to redevelop realistically, like Kaiser, Columbia Baptist, et cetera, it's more like 10 acres, which feels really feasible to actually be on the ground and say, and put yard signs up like, hey, this is a T-zone that is under consideration, come and join us at this session. I don't want to hear that people have never heard of this change, so all the neighbors adjacent to T-zone should be well informed about what we're considering. Last comment is around a general theme as I read through the work plan is a funding shortfall. Obviously, things have gotten a lot more expensive with inflation. Is this a concern or a global risk that we are managing? Is that something that we need to think about in upcoming budget amendments? And how big of a concern should we have over this?
It's a serious concern. So we'll be talking about that at your next work session, where we review year-end financials and then have some discussion about how some of last year's money could be used to plug some of these gaps. But it's a serious problem.
Okay. I think as part of the discussion, besides plugging, is we probably should talk about what's realistic to actually do. I'd hate to cut scope out and kind of, not get as much done as we hoped in each of those. So, thank you.
We'll also be doing that as part of the CIP project, because we need to reassess what's in the upcoming years and either retime them or look at additional funding or changing scope or delaying. So that'll be a very important part of your next CIP process as well.
Great. Thank you. I really appreciate these quarterly updates.
All right, other comments? Ms. Leon?
Just a couple, I think 2 questions. The Sharrow Bridge project under the Implement SIP pedestrian and bike project section is a new ad. Just curious, how much federal funding did VDOT provide us with for that?
I believe it's about $3 million,
So
and in the Northern Virginia district, we were the top funded bridge that hadn't been funded, and so they actually called us when they got the federal funding, so we could get Sharrow. And just last week, Mr. Shields was able to sign the documents with VDOT. So the funding allocation's been approved. Now we got to work on the full schedule and design and provide more detail as part of the next CIP. We'll adopt it in the
Okay.
FY
I
'24.
was just curious on that amount, whether,
Yeah.
like how much it cleared $1 million. So there's two projects here. The Park Avenue Great Streets project is at 60% design, and then there's the bike piece that's at 30%. If I read this correctly. Sorry.
No,
did I read-
I think all of it together is at 60%.
Okay, because it was in two separate sections.
Okay.
And the concern is, just concerned that the 30% representation for the bike design is lagging. So
Yeah,
if
no,
we-
that's a typo. I'll have to fix
Okay,
that.
okay, gotcha. I think those are my two questions, thank you.
All right, other questions, comments? Maybe if the chief is still back there, I could just ask you a little bit about speed limit, 20 miles an hour speed limit, and just your thoughts. I know you were on the call, I think, a few weeks ago about it, but maybe just to elaborate just a bit. How much resources do you have to devote to, being out there for speed enforcement?
We have, in terms of dedicated traffic control officer, we have one that is here typically 4 to 5 days a week. We usually keep them on day work. We anticipate in this January, to have one more after we get all of their other officers out of training. Because we've gone through about 25% of patrol has turned over in the last year. So we have a lot of officers that are still in training, field training. So once we get them fully trained and vetted, we anticipate having one more officer totally dedicated to speed control. Traffic control. Now, having said that, it's not that other officers in their spare time, when they're not on calls for service, don't do traffic control. But for dedicated members of traffic, it's 2.
Okay. And in terms of where they are, in my experience, it seems like there's a pretty good amount that are on Broad Street. I know there's been a lot of conversation about some of these secondary streets and how speeding and cut-through traffic and the like are issues there. A, have you done any movement of people to these other streets? Or B, do you anticipate doing that if, for example, the speed limit were lowered throughout the city? I guess just maybe some thoughts.
We track all of our traffic complaints, the complaints that come in, and also track the time in which we spend on locations where people complain about traffic. And in that, we also track the amount of tickets that we get. And so we do deploy them, particularly, for instance, we had a lot of attention towards Lincoln this past quarter, and other streets. So, I could look at where our timing has been, but a lot of our time is spent, you're right, on Broad. There's a lot of traffic comes through Broad and/or Washington. We've spent a lot of time on Lincoln, on West. And those are a few that I can think of off the top of my head, but we do have a ongoing list of traffic complaints that come in, and we try to address them at least with the officers that aren't on call for service, or we detail someone specifically to a location. As you can imagine, when we detail people into neighborhoods, we're less likely to get actual numbers, a lot of numbers of tickets, because the traffic is fairly low. There are other tactics that we have deployed, the marked cruiser throughout the community, and I know a lot of you have been supportive of that program, and put them in on side streets. We also, along with the sheriff's office, have a speed trailer that we can deploy as a forewarning to intervene on some of the traffic issues.
So I guess I might suggest maybe not as a metric or measure of success, how many tickets you might write, because I'm sure you write the most on Broad because that's where the most traffic is. But I think folks would like to have maybe a bit more presence in some of these secondary roads, just as a way to tell everyone that, hey, watch out. You don't know when they're going to be here, but they are here sometimes.
Certainly.
And so maybe just as a suggestion to consider some of these secondary or tertiary roads for, rotating appearances.
And for the next time it comes up, I'll certainly have some more data for you as far as when we are deploying there and how much time we're spent there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Could I follow up?
Of course.
The last time this was a major community concern, I recall, I think it was sometime in the 90s, we put up the $200 additional fine in residential traffic zones. Can you give us a brief impression of the usefulness of those signs? Do people receive tickets for $200 summonses at a certain level, or are they doing any good, or are they just making us feel good when we put them up?
Probably a little bit of both. I think there are times the officers have discretion to use that charge, but also the judges also have a discretion to not to null pros that charge or to throw that charge out, depending on the nature of the charges. For instance, I think if they're, as the officers had told me, that they have used it in the past. They've used it particularly when somebody is egregiously speeding and or not cooperative. They've been using it. I don't know what the percentage is of that use. I will tell you, there are other jurisdictions that abut us that have called here and said, how did you get that? I mean, because they too want it. I do not believe at this point it's a deterrent, but it is something that has been used.
Interesting. I'm not sure where to quite go with that. I mean, if we think it's a deterrent, but it's not, or if the charges are getting thrown out in court because the judge doesn't feel like that's where he wants to go or she, then, proliferation of signs all across town just for the sake of signs is not probably what we want to go to. Something else, more like marked cruisers parked. Are there any surplus police vehicle programs that we can participate in to get more basically unused but visual deterrent vehicles out onto the streets?
Well, we certainly do turn over cruisers. Every year we turn over about 2 cruisers. Sometimes, or most of the time, I'd say they're marked because they're the most used vehicles. We could keep them in the fleet and put them out on the community. The community marked vehicle that we put out, I mean, they use it probably every other day to every day. They change it up. And it's been good for crime prevention, but it's also been for traffic control.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
It takes a bit of a time for the officers to do that and to make sure. There are times when we get called from people to say, hey, this cruiser hasn't moved. You need to move it out of here. And we've done that as well into some of the shopping centers and stuff.
All right. Well, thank you. We're not going to solve it tonight, but I just, when we get to the point that we take the next step, whatever it is, I would really like it to be something that isn't just a feel-good, but actually something that has some evidence that it serves as a deterrent, and some of those other means sound like they ought to be explored, because just giving tickets isn't going to be enough to satisfy, the complaints that we're getting. Okay, thanks.
So before you leave, I've just got one more for you. So electric vehicles, do you all have any issue with electric vehicles? In other words, well, they don't meet our needs, or is it just you're agnostic? I mean, of course, I imagine you'd like to support sustainability and the like, but is there any reason that the police force, those cars aren't suitable for your needs?
For the administrative cars, they are. We're going to probably work towards maybe the detectives that would. I do not think they can sustain a total package. There's lights, the siren, the mobile data terminals, the flashlight, all of the packages that go into a police car. I'm not certain that those vehicles can sustain that power support. I will tell you, with the vehicle that I drive, which is electric, and we all support that, is if you don't turn off the mobile radio, it kills your your 12-volt very quickly. And I've had that vehicle, had to be jumped already. It's got 1,400 miles on it. But, so we need to gradually get into getting the marked police cars into electric. And I'm not sure we're there yet. Not so much us. I'm not sure the manufacturers are there yet to support it. Now, we do have hybrids that are out on the street that have been helpful, that are marked.
So, I mean, I guess to the extent you're able to provide us with information about that, I personally, I imagine some of my colleagues would like to see all of our cars move to all electric, not just, administrative cars. But I think we would certainly rely on you or defer to you and your department as to whether it meets your needs or not. And so maybe you could keep us informed. I know things are rapidly evolving, and batteries are getting better every day, and range and all that. So I think we'd love to just kind of be continually updated by you as to this, the ability for us to go in that direction.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. That's all I've got for you, Chief, maybe, but thank you for coming out and all the fine work you all do. Mr. Shields, if I could just add one more thing on your work plan. We talked a little bit about the T-zones. You'd mentioned one public engagement opportunity. I guess I would suggest, it's been something at least I've heard a fair amount about, I think my colleagues have as well, of considering a second opportunity for the public to attend for those who either don't know about it or have a conflict. I know there's at least a significant amount of interest, or it appears so, and so I might suggest maybe adding a second meeting as well.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that back to planning staff. Appreciate that.
All right. Unless there's anything else, I guess I would just say thank you to you and to all the staff for the work plan and all the great work you all are doing, and for the update this evening. All right, let's go ahead and move on now to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item?
Yes, sir. We have a continued public hearing for TR 22-35, resolution to amend the voluntary concessions, community benefits, and terms and conditions to reduce the minimum number of theater seats required and provide for the withholding of additional residential certificates of occupancy until the theater lease is executed for the project known as Founders Row on application by Mill Creek Residential Trust, Founders Row Holdings, LLC.
All right, Mr. Shields, is that you or Mr. Stoddard or someone else is going to be here? Mr. Fuller?
Well, Mayor, what I might suggest also is that we consider both the SC amendment and the Economic Development Agreement to provide a staff report that's unified about that,
Sure.
hear from the developer, and get public comment on those two together, and then there'll be separate motions for each. So could we call the other one as well?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Sure, that's TR 22-36, resolution to approve and authorize the city manager to execute an economic development agreement between the City of Falls Church, Virginia, and the City of Falls Church Economic Development Authority and Founders Row Holdings, LLC.
All right, there we go.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Clerk. So what we'll do tonight is Gary Fuller will be our staff lead, and he'll provide a staff report on the special exception amendment. And then I will provide just a review of the economic development agreement. And then we'll turn it over to Mr. Muffler, who represents Mill Creek, and he will provide his presentation. I do want to note just at the beginning, for the SE amendment, the version that is at the council's dais and is just posted on Granicus has the yellow highlighted revised on the top. There was, to my right is Mr. Brian Lubkeman, who is our interim city attorney, and as he was reviewing the documents, he detected a typographical error, which was substantive, and so we have corrected that in most of the places in the resolution. It had the correct number for the theater streets, but in one location it had the old number. So we've that's the revision that is highlighted. And so thank you, Mr. Lupkin, for making that catch.
He's already proved his worth. Welcome.
That's right.
Thank you for all the fine work you've done to date and the errors you've caught, but we look forward to
Many more errors to come.
yes,
for
exactly.
you.
A long and fruitful
Okay.
relationship, so maybe not too long. He's our interim city attorney. So, but anyway, thank you so much for joining us this evening and your work on behalf of the city. Mr. Shields?
So let me turn it over to Mr. Fuller for the staff report on the special exception amendment first.
Good evening, Mayor Tarter and members of City Council. Gary Fuller, Deputy Planning Director. TR 2235 is a request before the City Council to amend the approved voluntary concessions, community benefits, and special exception for Founders Row project. And this is requested by Mill Creek Residential Trust. And it is as follows, basically 4 items. One is to reduce the minimum number of theater seats from 750 to 850 persons to 550 to 850 persons. Secondly, to add arcades as a permissible accessory use to a permitted use. And thirdly, to strengthen securities to the city that the commercial theater component of the project will be delivered by increasing the number of residential certificates of occupancies, or COs, that will be held until the completion of the theater lease and execution. And fourthly, a newer item to memorialize the owner's commitments to additional courtyard landscaping and amenities pursuant to Exhibit A that is in your attachments. And there is a update to that this evening, and it'll be part of the presentation by the owner and applicant this evening. And that is an offer for 2 additional trees with planters in the Market Square area of the project. As background, on September 27th, the council continued the public hearing on TR 2235 to this evening for final consideration and action. Previously, on August 6th, council had referred it to the Planning Commission and Economic Development Authority for review and recommendation to council. The EDA met on September 6th and recommended approval as presented by staff and detailed in the City Council staff report of August 8th. That was before them. The Planning Commission held its advertised public hearing on September 21st, and its motion failed to pass in a 3-3 vote on the resolution. In terms of the staff analysis, it indicates that the required changes to the voluntary concessions and terms, or the VCs, requested by Mill Creek are relatively minor. Staff supports the proposed revisions to the VCs as they're in conformance with and association with the theater planning and at Founders Row and the securement of that theater. The key theater guarantees remain in place and are further enhanced from the prior 2021 VC amendment, in which Mill Creek offered now an additional 16 for a total of 36 residential units to ensure the theater lease execution in terms of CO holds. As context, in continuing the retail commitments in regard to the COs for Founders Row, entailing the Founders Row residential multifamily units, the holds that are related to the retail commitments are tied to the issuance of the final COs and represent almost 10% or 36 of the 394 residential units. Looking at all prior VCs associated with the movie theater, these continue to apply, and pending any further modification to the City Council this evening or otherwise. That includes modifications made on February 2021, which required the following, if you remember: prior to exceeding 51% certificate of occupancy for residential use, Founders Row escrowed $3.6 million for the sole use of the movie theater construction tenant fit-outs. That escrow account remains open and funded until construction of the theater begins. Secondly, the certificates of occupancy for the final 20 residential units will be withheld until 50% of the total commercial retail in the project, which is the other retail other than the theater, has tenant improvements underway. In addition to these previously agreed to provisions in 2021, the voluntary concessions the amendment to those tonight under TR 2235 include certificates of occupancies for the final 36 residential units, which is equivalent to the approximately 10% or of the Founders Row units will be withheld until a lease with the theater operator at Founders Row is executed. So this includes the 16 new residential CO holds that are proposed under this action tonight, and they would be added with the existing 20 residential holds for the purposes of the theater lease commitment. And then they would also remain, the 20 at least would also remain for the tenant fit outs, guaranteeing those. So these proposed changes would revise the VCs related to the theater, which is the minimum required number of seats for persons, the uses, an arcade as a not a primary use, but an accessory use, and added theater lease execution guarantees through these additional CO holds. And then also now includes the documentation of the owner's commitments to the additional courtyard landscaping amenities as shown in Exhibit A. So in summary, staff recommends that the City Council amend the approved VCs and special exception for Founders Row project as requested by Mill Creek. I'll turn it over to the city manager, and he'll provide a brief staff report on the next item, TR 2235, followed by a brief presentation by the owner applicant, Mill Creek. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. So I'll provide a summary of what is before the City Council with the resolution relating to the Economic Development Agreement. There'd be three parties to this proposed agreement, and those would be the City of Falls Church, the City of Falls Church Economic Development Authority, and Founders Row Holdings, LLC, which would be the owner. So what is contemplated in this agreement is to provide a financial incentive to the owner to have the movie theater operating on this site. This agreement goes back actually to 2016, which was part of the original approvals for then Mason Row, and it has now been extended. That had a 5-year term, and so what is requested is to renew that agreement after it expired in January of 2021, and to add an additional incentive relating to meals taxes. But let me summarize them in total, just so you have one picture of it. So some of the key terms of this agreement would provide for the amount equivalent to dollars raised through the theater admissions tax. The city has a 10% tax on movie theater admissions. We don't have a movie theater in the city, but this is a tax that actually goes back to the 1950s. So that tax would generate funds. The first $20,000 of that would be kept by the city, and then an amount above $20,000 and up to $360,000. In other words, the next $340,000 of theater admission tax receipts or the equivalent thereof would be refunded through a grant by the Economic Development Authority back to the owner. Similarly, with respect to meals taxes generated by sales of the theater specifically, not for the rest of the project, but just specific to the theater, because this is a dine-in concept movie theater, that the first $10,000 of meals tax receipts would be retained by the city, and then the amount equivalent to meals tax receipts between $10,000 and $160,000, in other words, $150,000 benefit maximum, would be paid to the owner, again, through the EDA as an economic development incentive. This agreement has a 30-year term as proposed, and the numbers that I've provided would have a 3% annual increase to the city share. In other words, the first slices that come to the city would increase by 3%, but also for the owner's share, that also would increase by 3% on an annual basis. There is a provision that if in any year the gross receipts of the theater shall exceed $13 million, then the meals tax element of this incentive would be suspended for that year. If there are 4 years in a row of that meeting that milestone, then the meals tax element of the incentive would be terminated, and the term of the admissions tax element of the incentive would be reduced to the original 20 years that was approved back in 2016. A couple other key features of the agreement. The agreement does provide performance milestones for the owner that they must meet, or this agreement is terminated. So the first of those performance milestones is the lease execution by the end of October. Another one is the submission of design development drawings by the end of this calendar year, December 31st. Submission of building permits by March 31st of 2023. Completion of the improvements by the owner by March 31st, 2024, and the theater opening by May 31st, 2024. So those are the milestones. There was a provision relating to proration in the original agreement. The start date would be the first full fiscal year after the theater opened. The way the agreement is written right now, there is a proration provision that will allow this agreement to start when the theater opens. The term remains 30 years, however, and so the agreement would end on a prorated basis at the end of that 30-year term as well. There's a provision relating to the admissions tax rate, where if the City Council in the future were to increase the theater admission tax rate above 10%, that effectively that increase then would be returned to the owner for this theater. That's a summary of some of the key terms, and I will stop there to see if council has any questions for me, or we could go straight to the owner's presentation and hold questions till then, whichever is the council's preference.
All right, why don't we go ahead and take all the questions at once? Let's turn it over to Mr. Muffler. Welcome.
Thank you all very much. It's good to see you all. Appreciate you having me here in person. Hopefully, there we go. There's our presentation up as well. Again, just for the public, my name is Joe Muffler. I'm with Mill Creek Residential Trust, representing the ownership of the property. We sincerely appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. This has clearly been a long time coming. This is something we've been working on for many years now, and I'm excited to share some of the news in addition to giving you an update. I'm going to touch a lot on what Mr. Shields and Mr. Fuller have brought on, albeit I'll provide additional context and be brief with that. However, I've also been asked to discuss the project at large and certain elements of the project as well, not just the theater element. So I do want to be judicious with my time and leave time for questions and answers as well. So if we could change to the next slide here. This is a summary of the commercial programming status as of today at Founders Row. When I refer to inline retail, that is effectively non-theater retail. Of that, about 27% is under lease today. The theater, which we will discuss the lease of, which is another 39%. So as of today, 2/3 of the retail at Founders Row is under lease. Additionally, we are in the final stages of agreeing to terms with other tenants, totaling another 11% of the square footage. So granted, 66% is the firm number, but we have approximately another 11%. So over 3/4 of the retail, we believe in very short term, will be at or near lease for Founders Row. So that leaves approximately 19,000 square feet of remaining retail, or approximately 24% of the retail, of which it should be noted, almost half of which is in one space. And we'll look at an exhibit on the next slide here that highlights that. That was a tenant that was under lease when we started construction at approvals. You can see it there in space number 15, but that concept also went bankrupt during the pandemic. So this gives an outline as to the different areas that are at lease. The concepts that have the logos on them or indicated are the ones that are at lease. You'll note that one is a tenant that will be announced here in short order. It is a full-service restaurant. And then the 3 areas in green are the tenants that we are negotiating. What I would call your attention to is spaces 9 and 16 are very solid corner key spaces that we have also been actively discussing with tenants. And if you look at kind of what's remaining, be it spaces 4, 17, 18, 19, it's really these small inline spaces that frankly, in any project of this size, would be the last tenants to sign, because they're filling in the last pieces of the puzzle. So we feel very good about where the retail stands today. And if you could go to the next slide, this provides a more detailed summary about the specific tenants. So walking through this just very quickly, Chase and Tails, Nui, and Roleplay Vietnamese Grill are 3 restaurants that are under construction, have been for about 6 months now. They are scheduled to open in late November, early December. Their storefronts, they have assured me, will be installed late October, early November. I saw them welding steel in there earlier last week. And if you go on their website, they are currently hiring and marketing. So we will be having a grand opening of the retail here in the next 6 weeks. Ellie Bird, which is the Michelin star concept, is under construction as of 2 weeks ago, and they are scheduled for an opening Q1 of next year. The remaining tenants, Club Pilates, Kyo Matcha, Kyo Ramen, Forever Young Med Spa, and then the to-be-announced restaurant, are in various stages of permitting and design, also scheduled for the first half of next year opening. Lastly is Paragon, the movie theater, not to lose sight of kind of the elephant in the project. We are ongoing design with them as well, and we'll touch on more of that in that presentation. Next slide, please. So this is where we deviate from things about commercial programming to talk about some of the ancillary, not to say secondary, but other areas of the project that have been requested of us to study. Market Square feels empty right now. There's no way around that. We spent years programming this with staff, with council, with boards and commissions to create an area that, when open and fully activated, becomes a central gathering space for the community, for the city. A space that can host events, that can have outdoor dining, mixed with families playing, mixed with adults enjoying drinks and kids playing in a fountain and concerts and farmers markets, et cetera, et cetera. Programming is essential to that space. As such, keeping that space open to activate it in the future to allow for future programming, lights at the holidays, concerts, et cetera, is really important. However, we also understand the importance of a green space inside the city as well. What I would say regarding this in some of the next slides is that all elements of this project, if all of you certainly recall, were negotiated, detailed, designed to exacting standards. I would like to think that this space has been truly maximized. We'll talk about that when we talk about bike parking in terms of how difficult it is to move pieces around in here. However, we have removed elements of the Market Square. If you're looking on the left-hand side, the 2 dots A are 2 new trees that will be planted or put in planters, as you can see kind of what those look like in the Market Square, that allows the Market Square to remain open while creating that central green space that activates kind of the pedestrian and road experience. So again, it kind of gives you the best of all worlds, where you allow the Market Square to be utilized to its maximum potential while also bringing more green space to that Market Square. I know 2 trees may seem little, but I do believe it will make a substantial impact. It is a significant capital investment, but we do believe it's for the betterment of the Market Square, and appreciate council working with us through this. One element I have added just to illustrate like how these spaces could be used because they feel empty is, if you look up kind of in the hatched area on the north side of this, is the Ellie Bird outdoor seating area, and you can see how much area that actually is going to take up in real life. It's a significant outdoor space that isn't just tables and chairs, but it's a beautiful pergola with fans and heaters. They will have plantings built into their space as well. This space becomes very different 6 months from now than it is today. All that said, there will be 2 trees put into the square as well. One thing that is not indicated in here, but we have discussed with the AAB, with staff, Planning Commission, maybe not Planning Commission, but AAB and staff, is the incorporation of a quote-unquote gateway element for the movie theater, which will include string lights and some signage at the entryway on the south side, kind of where that first tree is, so that area with the roundabout and some of the street parking is going to have lights over it, so you've got even more activation, frankly, that's coming to this area over the next 6 months as well. Next slide, please. Bike share is an element that we've discussed. So just to be clear here, the green location on the north side of the site, and this is a little bit hard to read. Oh, and you know what? This is a slightly old exhibit, so I apologize. So I'll have to walk through this a little bit different. But that location on the north side of the site was the original bike share location. We worked very hard with staff because both parties were aligned to try to make that location work given its proximity to the WNOD trail. Unfortunately, for reasons beyond our control, and I think lessons learned for all of us, is that the bike share has certain restrictions, requirements with regards to solar power. And trust me, it wasn't for lack of trying. We proffered buying a stockpile of car batteries to serve as backup power, running solar panels to the roof to create that space, and just nothing we could come up with was feasible. So back to when we talked about the programming of the streetscape and the surrounding areas of Founders Row, we walked the entire site with the bike share, with staff, with our engineers to find how can we relocate street elements, where can we relocate street elements to incorporate a bike share. And this space right here along Broad Street was the only location along the entire property that didn't conflict with utilities, traffic poles, et cetera, et cetera. So good news is we're very proud that we'll be able to bring a bike share. I believe installation is scheduled for either next month, November, or early December. So we're pleased that a bike share will be brought. It will have very, public focus. And from a connectivity perspective, bikers will still have the ability to take those bikes, scoot right up Founders Avenue, cross over at the crosswalk with the traffic light, and hop on the WNOD trail. One other thing that is not mentioned on here, so I apologize. There was another exhibit that we edited after this one that called out the exterior bike racks, because I know there's been a lot of conversations about that. One thing that should be noted is the bike racks initially had been improperly installed. They were too high. Those, as of about 6 weeks ago, you should notice, are now at a proper level. There are 21 of those stations throughout this project. Again, effectively anywhere there could be one, there has been put one throughout this project. So we'll make sure that that exhibit gets circulated with an update after this meeting. Next slide, please. This is definitely an older presentation. Okay, so let's move on to the theater then. I did have a slide about just interior bike parking as well to say that there are 170 interior bike parking spaces. They are all inside the first level of the garage, right as you pull in. So if you're coming down Founders Avenue, that garage entrance, which is closest to the WNOD trail, you come in on the right and on the left, huge bike storage lockers for visitors and for residents. So what is realistically the most convenient bike parking locations that we could put in the project. And again, that's about 170 spaces. So let's move on to the theater, shall we? As we've mentioned before, as has been publicly disclosed, Paragon Theaters out of Florida is the theater operator that we have been working with for the better part of the last 2 years since Studio Movie Grill filed for bankruptcy almost exactly 2 years ago. I believe it was October 20th, 2020 that we received that wonderful letter in the mail. We've been working with them tirelessly to bring this vision to the City of Falls Church and are very pleased and proud of where we are today. With regards to Paragon, as you can see in the renderings, this is actually renderings of Founders Row. They use the Fenton just name as a placeholder in the background, all the renderings that you see. Fenton is a project that Hines developed in Cary, North Carolina, massive mixed-use project. Not as much residential as Founders Row. In fact, I don't think there's any residential. It's a massive commercial project, of which Paragon is the anchor. They opened this summer, despite no other retail being open. Frankly, there isn't even a lot of parking open. And despite that, they've been met with tremendous enthusiasm, positive reception, and performance. The CEO of Paragon did meet with city staff, select members of city staff last week, 2 weeks ago, to share his vision, not only for the company, for the future of the movie theater industry, but for specifically Founders Row and why they're passionate about the City of Falls Church. I do think it's important in context to talk about just where we are with the industry and why this has been so difficult. It has been a roller coaster. We all saw the success of Top Gun. I think last time I was here, I said, thank God for Tom Cruise for resuscitating the movie theater industry. Since that waned off, September was the worst box office month in 26 years, COVID notwithstanding. Now that is largely due to supply. If anyone follows movies, there's just simply haven't been movies available. We're effectively at the point where Hollywood shut down for COVID, and next year should be a much better year for the box office. But it is still in the projection phase as opposed to the realization phase. The second huge thing that has happened, frankly, since the last time we met on this, is that Regal Cinemas filed for bankruptcy. I'm not going to divulge any of the confidential details of the lease. I can tell you that this had a meaningful impact in our negotiations. Regal Cinemas is the second largest theater owner in the country, I believe in the world. And with them going bankrupt and giving back theaters, it makes it that much more difficult to obviously bring a new build theater to life. So one of the pieces of context that I did want to share is we're working with a consultancy called IGM Consultants, who have over 30 years in working in the theater industry and specifically advising developers such as myself, ownership groups such as myself, on how to put these deals together because they are extremely complicated. I'm not saying they know everything about the movie theater industry. I'm saying they are experts in the movie theater industry and know a lot. I asked them last week, of all the deals you're working on that you've heard of from your competitors, from anyone across the country, how many new build leases are getting done this year? They said Founders Row is the only one we're aware of. I don't know if that's true. There may be 5. Point being, this is a rare milestone given where we are in the movie theater landscape across this entire country. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll talk about the EDA agreement. Mr. Shields spoke very eloquently about the history of this, so I don't need to touch on this much. This is revisiting a lot of the context that we talked about in March, frankly, when we came to our term sheet agreement, of which we have very, I would say we've honed it pretty closely to since March. I wanted to cite a couple of the things from the original EDA agreement, which is that, it was agreed in 2016, frankly, that a movie theater would provide necessary and desirable infrastructure and public improvements, resulting in economic development for the city of Falls Church. And next slide. It was also acknowledged that given the costs and the complexities of building such a theater in an infill mixed-use environment, the city and the authority acknowledged that it was reasonable for the economic development incentive plan. I think what I contended in March was that if it was reasonable 6 years ago, given everything with where the theater industry has gone through, where it is today, I would posture that it is reasonable today, and that has been substantiated by the city's 2 separate third-party financial accountants who have evaluated our open books, both residential and retail, to concur on the proposal that's before you. A little bit more of the history. Construction commenced in 2018 when we had a lease with Studio Movie Grill, and a theater box was subsequently built. SMG went bankrupt in October of 2020. The original agreement expired in January 2021, and we have reached an agreement with a new theater operator seeking to reinstate and modify the original agreement. Next slide. So the summary terms here is, again, we are requesting very briefly to extend this from 20 years to 30 years. These are incentive plans. Mr. Shields touched on the amounts as are illustrated there. Incentive is the operative word here, because this is not a guaranteed tax payment. Effectively, it is utilizing revenue that will be generated by the theater to help subsidize the cost of the theater. Said otherwise, if there is no theater, there's no additional tax revenue, meaning the city is not writing an additional tax check to the ownership here. This is all contingent on not only the theater opening, but the theater performing. If the theater underperforms, ownership underperforms, correct? So this keeps the city and ownership and theater in alignment, effectively trying to create a win-win situation. And this was the spirit of the agreement back in 2016. Mr. Shields has touched on these other items, so I will not revisit those. Next slide here. This is a picture of that theater box that some of you have toured. Next slide. You can see that this is a very large box that is really set up to be a movie theater. And I include this because what we are not talking about here is a request for a subsidy to go and build a movie theater or another use, but to say we have built the movie theater that we have all sought for almost a decade to bring to the city. We are at the precipice of being able to effectuate the realization of that goal. The box is there, and now we need to bring the tenant into it to bring this to reality. Next slide. This is what that theater could look like approximately 18 months from now, if not 12 months from now, if we're able to move very quickly on this. Paragon is a very luxury theater. I've toured 2 of them, 2 of their newer theaters. They have older theaters, they have newer theaters. Their newer theaters, I'm just saying this honestly, are among, if not the nicest theaters I've ever been in. It's hard to tell here, but in the middle here, you can kind of see it. There's separate seatings. There's pod-style seatings that have actually heated and cooled seats, like you would see in like a luxury car. So you have different tiers of where you can purchase a ticket. If you want a basic ticket, that's fine. If you want a ticket where you can order food to your seat, you can do that. If you want a VIP ticket in a pod, you can do that as well. One of the things that's been mentioned is they have their own custom premium large format. It's called an Extreme Theater. It's effectively an IMAX-style theater. Incredibly impressive, and they will be bringing that to the city as well. Next slide. Might be loading. So, well, I'll try to remember. I'll try to refresh from memory as to where we were going for here. But it is effectively near the conclusion of the presentation. The VCs have been brought up. We are requesting a reduction to the seat count. Just in terms of history, there, the original voluntary concessions in 2016 had a very large range of seat count. When we came back to modify in 2018 with Studio Movie Grill, we effectively just said, let's just make the seat count what Studio Movie Grill is. Now we're doing the same for the alternative theater as well. We've requested the amusement arcade to be added as an ancillary use. I think that's incredibly important because one of the things with theaters these days is they are not just theaters. They have to be more. They have to be dine-in. You have to have the mouse traps, so what they call a barcade. So whether it's duck pin bowling, very high-end amusement, it is a secondary use, but it's incredibly important to the operation of the theater. They will be bringing dine-in to the city. Indoor, outdoor bar. There were renderings in there that you could have seen that showed that element. And then the last piece here that I remember with that next slide were the milestones and the holdback. So the other part of the VCs was that we are holding back 16 additional units from certificates of occupancy. I would like to point out that while we are amending the VCs to reflect that now, for 6 months now we have honored our word, and we have not brought, those units are not occupied. So it's not memorialized, but it has been in practice since we agreed to these terms in March. Those 16 units get released when we sign the lease, and then as Mr. Shields and Mr. Fuller pointed out, the remaining 20 units are not released until the theater itself begins, or until we reach, 50% of tenant improvements underway. There are milestones in there that Mr. Shields brought up that I'm happy to discuss further. But as I conclude here, and I apologize for being a little rattled without the slides, I do want to thank council, staff, planning commission, and the general citizenry for working with us on this for, again, almost 10 years now. We've gone through a very dark period in the movie theater industry. It has taken a tremendous amount of work on all of our parts, and a little performative, but I mean, this is the lease for a movie theater in the city of Falls Church. The fact that we've all collectively been able to get here to this point is nothing short of, I don't want to say a miracle, but a very, very strong achievement. So thank you all for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions and appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
All right, thank you so much. Let's go ahead, Madam Clerk, and open this up to public comment. Is there any member of the public or on video that wishes to speak to this matter? I know you already signed up, Mr. Young, and we're going to call you first. But let's go ahead and call for public comment. I'm going to let the city clerk do that.
Yes, we have Mr. Bob Young, who has signed up to speak on this matter.
Thank you. My name is Bob Young. I live at 608 Timber Lane. I'm here tonight representing the Economic Development Authority, which, as you all know, is a party to this agreement. This was discussed thoroughly some weeks ago at an EDA public meeting, and the members unanimously endorsed it. I want to reinforce that tonight. We believe this is an agreement that's good for the citizens, good for the city government, and we would hope that you could approve it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to either of the two matters associated with this presentation this evening? Anyone on the internet or the web?
No, sir.
All right, well, this matter is closed to public comment. Let's open it up to questions or comments from council. Does anyone have any questions or comments from City Council? Ms. Hiscott?
I just wanted to make a clarifying comment based upon some questions that have come to me over the past couple of days with regard to using public dollars towards private investment. And what I wanted to make clear is that the taxes that we're talking about today are taxes that are paid by those folks who attend the theater. So if you're not attending the theater and you're not paying taxes on those tickets, you are not contributing to the taxes that are going back to the owner. It's not property tax or personal tax or coming from operating accounts anywhere else in the city. So it's not detracting from, you're not taking, the average person who's paying their tax unless they're going to a movie theater is not going to be providing this incentive to the developer. So if I've said that accurately, I just want to make sure I'm clarifying that for some folks who had some confusion around the use of taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. There are other comments, Mr. Duncan?
Just a quick question. I don't want to get too down into the weeds, but I think this is for city staff. So just the structure of how the money, excuse me, is collected by the city, how it's booked. Does it go through Finance Department, Commissioner of the Revenue? I think it's important that this be very transparent and very monitorable, if that's a word. Have we thought about that? I know there's precedent with the BJ's deal, but could you just speak a little bit to how the money comes in and how it's tracked as we reach these milestones along the way of, when they hit a certain number, then could you just speak to that a little bit?
So the mechanics of it are important. So the taxes will be collected and paid to the city's coffers. At the end of the fiscal year, there's an accounting of those taxes that have been received. Then there is an appropriation by the city council to the EDA of that amount, and then the EDA makes a grant to the owner of that amount. And so that is the basic mechanics of how it would work. So the actual payment to the owner would occur, after enough time for all the accounting to have been done and verified, and that would typically be in September then of the following fiscal year.
So we collect and hold, am I saying this right? We collect and hold the money until such time that we close the books and then decide how much basically gets refunded back under the terms of the agreement.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Snyder?
Sure. So I want to go to TR 22-35 and to line 665 through 667, which is the withholding of the certificate of occupancies provision. And it's turned on a lease, but leases can be modified, they can be terminated. So what happens to the holding of the 36 residential units if a lease is entered into but is later terminated by the developer? What happens then? Is the stick, if you will, of the 36 residential units, because the lease was entered into but later terminated, does that stick cease to exist and those units can go ahead and be occupied? And that's a question for the city attorney.
Good evening. So the short answer is that the trigger is the lease being executed. So the moment that the lease is executed, certificate of occupancies for any of the final 36 residential units will be issued. As to whether, if the lease is terminated somewhere in that number 1 through number 36 of the residential units, I think the argument is that if the lease is terminated, any of those 36 residential units for which a certificate of occupancy has not been issued would not then be issued.
Okay, so in view of my concern with this, I will propose an amendment to line 665 through 667 as follows. It would read, no certificate of occupancy for any of the final 36 residential units will be issued until the theater is open and operating and evidence thereof is provided to the city manager. That way we'll be assured that the stick, if you will, here is actually effective in the theater being opened and operating, as opposed to just a lease being issued, which may be terminated later on. Therefore, you don't have the lease and you've eliminated the tie to to the 36 residential units, which is really the enforcement mechanism of the theater.
Mr. Snyder, may I step in here just because I think there's some additional context to this. It's a little bit of confusing language, if I can say. There are 36 total holdback units. There are effectively 2 triggers within those 36 holdback units. When the theater lease is executed, 16 of the 36 units are then available for occupancy to development when the lease is signed. The remaining 20 units, and to be clear, that provision is a new provision. The 16 units holdback is a new provision. The other 20 units are held back until 50% of the tenant improvements of the retail are underway. That is a provision that I believe goes all the way back to maybe the original VCs in 2016, certainly back to 2018. That was one of the city's original kind of sticks, if you will, to make sure that we were building out the retail.
Right, but the 16 units is really the enforcement of the theater.
Well, there's one other caveat here that's not mentioned that Mr. Fuller did bring up that's a massive stick is the $3.6 million that is currently in escrow with the city. That $3.6 million has no sunset provision. It is not tied to the lease. It is tied to the construction and the opening of the movie theater. So that $3.6 million, if the lease were to terminate, which I can assure you we would not want to do, because then we would have no ability to access that $3.6 million. We don't get that. There's no 2 years from now you get that back. That's stuck in perpetuity until a theater is open. So I would say there are milestones along the way to incentivize the developer to continue to move this process forward. So I just wanted to provide that context.
Sure, very relevant. I appreciate it. But the fact of the matter is that the additional 16 units hold could be eliminated by a lease that's later terminated.
That would be my perception of it, is once the occupancy certs are granted, they don't get rescinded.
Thank you. That's why I propose the amendment that I do.
Do we have other comments from folks? Other questions?
One thing I would just note is that these are in the voluntary concessions, and so this has been a negotiated process, and so that change is a substantial change. I think the developer would, or the owner would need to agree to that in the voluntary concessions. There has been a lot of discussion about this, and the staff approach on this has been geared towards providing all of the guarantees that we could reasonably get, and we fought hard for the ones we did get, that ultimately the community will get the theater. And so I'd just note that as well.
I appreciate that, but I'm called upon to approve this agreement tonight. So I've moved a change in line 665 through 667. Let me read it again. No certificate of occupancy for any of the final 36 residential units will be issued until the theater is open and operating and evidence thereof is provided to the city manager.
And does the city attorney, did you have something you wanted to say? I don't want to put you on the spot, but if
Again, just to clarify, these are voluntary concessions. I understand the tone and the flavor of the amendment, but I think for the record, we'd need to ask the developer whether he'd be amenable to that amendment language.
We would not be.
Not surprised.
So then,
Well, and if I may,
sorry.
sorry, just to provide justification.
well, I think you've already done that. I mean, I think we
Okay,
just heard from
but
you.
I think it is important. Once you've issued a certificate of occupancy, that means you have a resident. If you're retracting a certificate of occupancy, that means we're evicting a resident.
I
because
don't
they
think
no
that's
longer
what's the
be able to
suggestion. I think you'd never get it in the first place.
Okay. Well,
And so I think the net effect would no one would be evicted. You just wouldn't get the certificate of occupancy and therefore have a resident in the first place.
So, Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Snyder, I would suggest, given that these are voluntary concessions, that the proper approach then would be to vote on the resolution as drafted. And obviously, if you have a concern with the language, that might influence your vote. But imposing these, when they are in fact voluntary concessions, would, in my opinion, would be improper.
All right. So other comments, Ms. Hardy?
Thank you, Mr. Shields, and thank you, Mr. Muffler. So I went back to my notes from the past 3 work sessions now we've had on this, and so I wanted to make sure we were being responsive to those comments. So first of all, thank you for the plaza improvements. While 2 trees is not substantial, I appreciate the effort and look forward to seeing the rest of the build-out as you've laid out. One of the other things I asked for is making sure that city staff got a copy of the lease and had a review. I know that obviously since it's not signed yet, we probably can't discuss it, but I wanted to look to the city attorney and city manager and see if they had any comments to offer that could be publicly consumed.
So I don't think I can speak to the lease, other than to affirm that it does exist. It was reviewed by the city attorney, and the city attorney has provided under attorney-client privilege some information to the council about that.
Okay.
With respect to the meeting with the CEO of Paragon, it was, one of the purposes of that was to discuss the business plan, the schedule, and the intent of the executive leadership of that organization for this site. Mr. Muffler has described the theater's operations. We discussed those directly with the CEO, and there's really no difference between the way the CEO is describing the product and what you've heard from Mr. Muffler tonight. I will share with the council, I was impressed by the approach that they take. They're very thoughtful about the changing markets of theaters. They're very sensitive to what is happening in the world, and they're very thoughtful about how to be successful in that changing environment. And that was just one impression that I got from the conversation, that this was a company that is thinking about this business model in fresh ways, that to create an experience for the movie theater goer, for the consumer, with an eye towards not replicating some of the mistakes that other movie theater, the big operators are struggling with right now. So those are a couple of impressions that I would share with the council and public.
Great, thank you. We talked about bike shares. I think hopefully that new location will be satisfactory. Milestones. So we talked about the new milestones. Your first one being having a signed lease by end of October, which at this point is 20 days from now. Otherwise, all this is null.
Correct.
And I assume you are on track for that, given that you're
Correct.
holding up a lease.
Correct.
Great. And we feel good about having drawings by the end of year and then construction,
Correct.
those other.
That's correct. Yeah, what we've tried to do is, the milestones weren't created willy-nilly, right? There was thought that went into what are the things that we can control, and how can you hold us accountable for the things that are within our control. And that's effectively what the milestones are that are listed here.
Okay. So on to obviously the tax incentives part of it, right? Largely, the theater deal predates many of us from 2015, 2016. We've kind of inherited this project where the project really largely was built around a theater anchor. Post-COVID, I understand that with Studio Movie Grill going out of business, have there been other viable options for this space? Other theater operators we've entertained?
I don't know if that's a trick question. So, look, very candidly, we have put a fresh set of eyes on everything, right? As anyone had to do post-COVID. Who knew if theaters were going to exist? The reality is, though, you said it succinctly, this theater was designed for a theater. This project was designed for a theater, not only in terms of the physical construction of the infrastructure you saw, but in terms of the merchandising, the appeal. It's how we've been able to attract the quality of the tenants that we have and the quality of the tenants we think we're going to get. Is because you have a very unique anchor to a project. So could something else be there? Sure. Has our commitment been for 7, 8, whatever it's been, 6, 7 years now to bring a theater to the city? It is and continues to be.
Thank you. And so while I guess I had forgotten that we actually had those 2 independent consultants, actually thank you, Mr. Shields, or whoever it was that reminded us about that confirmed the need for the tax incentives given kind of the state of the theater industry. So that was a helpful reminder. And I assume that those were done independently, Mr. Shields?
I'm not sure what you mean. Were the
Like they
two
looked at the books.
independently of each other?
They looked at the books without, obviously, we couldn't be part of that.
They did look at the books, and they came to their own independent conclusions. And so I think that's an accurate characterization.
Okay. So given that the site really was built around the theater, and I think the theater is key to activating the project and will be key to seeing the rest of the commercial. I don't hear of a viable alternative for this shell of a space. And so while I think there's some members of the community who may disagree with the idea of using incentives to bring in private business, given that this project has been built around it, we've had independent consultants confirm the need for it, given the commitment for a theater. I think it would be irresponsible for us to not proceed with it at this point. That's it for now. Thank you.
Other comments? Ms. Conley?
I wish to associate myself almost 100% with what Letty just said. Thank you. I've been trying to lay out all the different complex pieces that are there, and this project came to us before I was ever on City Council. That was 2013. And we struggled and tried to figure out a way forward, and having a movie theater in there is how we were able to move it forward. The community supported that. And all of these details about this kind of tax, and even we had to pass an ordinance to allow this kind of tax. That took a while. We've had so many votes on this project up till this point. It's unfortunate that the winds of the world are affecting us in this way. You know, it would be nice if Falls Church was its own little island and we could say, yes, we know this is going to work, but we are surrounded by larger jurisdictions. We know this is the only place in Falls Church we could put a movie theater because of proximity to other jurisdictions' movie theaters. So I agree with Letty that at this point it would be irresponsible not to vote for it. I was looking back at my notes, and one of the things I had asked for was some kind of mural or artwork or something more attractive on the inside of the parking garage there on Broad Street. That's not in the voluntary concessions. I wonder if that's anything that is possible to add as people come in, because it's such a big gaping gray hole that takes away from the loveliness of the street front.
So we did paint that entry to the garage. There is no mural, given that it's the
Yeah.
inside of the garage, and it's where we have, frankly, it's also the loading dock. It's,
Right,
there's a lot going on right there. But we did paint it, which I think made a significant impact.
All right, maybe it's not gray anymore.
So it's not gray. It is
Okay.
it's a nice white. So yes.
Yes. I drove by Pearson Square earlier today and
Yes.
saw that they just have a welcome to Pearson Square.
Yeah.
And that looks very nice. Two other things, just I find it ironic with I guess the arcade is just something different. We haven't permitted an arcade in a long time, although there is an arcade at Solace Brewery and at the bowling alley and other places. So it just makes you wonder exactly, there are a lot of different kinds of arcades.
Right.
And do you have any insight into that?
So
You mentioned duck pin bowling.
Yeah, this is in Chuck E. Cheese. It's, if you've been to maybe and this is a much bigger scale, but if you've been to Punch Bowl Social in Ballston, in the Ballston Mall, where you have a bar that has duck pin bowling and some video games, it's like that. I mean, that's massive, right? That's huge, but it's a similar type concept. What I will say is that the CEOs pride themselves on bringing kind of best-in-class arcade amusements to it. They go to conventions and they find the top of the Dave & Buster's type stuff to bring. So it's not a large space. I mean, we're talking about 1,000 square feet here. The restaurant takes up the majority of that ground floor, and then you've got the back of the house stuff. But, it's important to create mousetraps in today's environment, especially in this marketplace where you have AMC Tyson's, which is, I think, the second most profitable movie theater in the country, Angelica, Ballston. You have a lot of competition. You've got to find a way to stand out.
Special.
That's the barcade. That's the premium large format. Back to Mr. Shields' points, it's one of the reasons we aligned ourselves with this operator is they have a very strong, lucid take on what the future of this business looks like.
Okay. So I would find it ironic that if we end up with duck pin bowling, the very second mixed-use development we put in replaced a beloved ancient duck pin bowling alley. And we could probably look back at the comments from those meetings to see how many people were devastated that duck pin bowling was going away. So if we could bring it back, that'd be lovely. Right, Phil? Yes, I bowled there too. Went to birthday parties there. And then the last thing, speaking of birthdays, you said May 31st, 2024 is the projected opening. That's my birthday. So
Perfect.
let's have my birthday
Perfect.
party
Let's
there in
do it.
2024.
Cannot wait. Put it on the calendar.
All right, other comments? If not, I've got a few questions. Oh, I'm sorry, you did?
Yeah, just
Okay.
I can be brave. Joe, can you speak to this timeline and what, if any, you can deliver in terms of acceleration
Sure.
on a functional and opening theater before
Sure.
May. Sorry,
Yeah.
I would love to celebrate your birthday
No,
there.
no, and this was part of actually our conversation with staff, is I have to commend staff for saying, we want to get as creative as possible to figure out a way to get this thing open as soon as possible. So Jim Snyder and the economic development team and the building safety team have really locked hands with us and said, how can we work with you on this? They said it to the CEO, how can we work with you to get this open?
Yeah.
So much, and I've said this before, and it's one of the reasons we've bifurcated some of these milestones, is theaters are not restaurants. They won't just open when they're done. They need to open when they're ready. And what I mean by that is they need to make sure that when they open that they have product, so it's a good weekend, there's good movies. You don't open when there's no movies. That would be really bad. And when staff and everyone is ready to go. So, look, we're committed to a March delivery. If we can deliver it sooner, if we can deliver it by Christmas, great, because they would love to open over the holiday season. But the reality is, if we finish in March, they're going to want to say, let's wait till the Memorial Day blockbuster season. That's just that they've told us that. They told staff that. That's what they're going to want to do. But we are working with staff to figure out ways. Can we bifurcate the permit? Can we find ways of starting work earlier by doing things? So we're in the early stages of that. Like I said, I mean, we've got a design development set of drawings that we're hope to complete before the end of the year.
Yeah.
And then we can really start choosing our own adventure. Look, I would love to get this open by the end of next year, but I certainly can't sit here and tell you that.
So this 5/34 date is really coming from your Paragon,
Correct.
right? And in terms of
Yeah.
their inflexibility or their ability to their desire to hedge and make the call on when it's right to open.
Correct. Yeah, that's effectively the outside date that they've provided us.
Okay. I also just want to echo, from my perspective and putting it out on record, I thank you, Debbie, for explaining, right, the clarity around where this is, given a Washington Post article that came out, that this is, taxes that are generated from that service. This is not core tax revenue base around our property taxes or personal property taxes. If it's a difference. I do believe that there is value to creating. This is not just a theater; it's a family entertainment center. I see deliberate design with trying to create a concept that meets, the current the conditions in the market, as well as where the future needs are. I also, there's a lot of naysayers around the movie industry, but at the end of it all, it's driven, by disposable income and consumer confidence, right? And when you take a look at where we are in the economy in the United States, like labor rates are the highest in how many years, right? Falls Church City has a lot of disposable income, right? I mean, aside from inflation, indicators from an economy are not trying to be an economist, but it's not looking like 2008. So I do think that reversing the decision and pausing it and relooking at what to do with the space, is, throws away deep community engagement and discussion in prior councils that has happened on this for over 6 or 7 years. So I'd be supportive of proceeding with this. Thanks, Dave.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks very much. A question about the movies. Will this theater be running first-run movies?
So it's a great question, right? And it kind of harkens to what do movie theaters do these days, right? So yes, the answer to that is yes. But will they do other things as well? Will they broadcast Premier League games? Yes. Will they allow theaters to be rented out for birthday parties so you can go play the original Top Gun? Yes. Will they do reruns like Avatar? I think right now, again, because there's no supply, the original Avatar, I think, is like the biggest movie in America right now again. So they're going to be doing all that stuff. But if you go on a Paragon's website, they're 99% new releases. And then it's just about how do you get creative and create additional income in your theaters. given where movies are going.
So we can expect first-run
Yes.
movies at this theater?
Oh, yeah, it's going to be competing directly, as I mentioned, Angelica, Tyson's, et cetera. Yes.
Right, okay, thanks. So the reason why I press so hard on the, sort of the enforcement mechanism is disappointment, the way this project has gone with delay after delay of the commercial part and delay after delay of the theaters. So that's why maintaining whatever leverage we have was very important to me, and that's why I proposed what I did. Thank you.
All right, other comments, Mr. Duncan?
Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Let's try to wrap this up.
Yes, I'll try to be brief. Thank you for indulging me. Since I've been on council, this project has been a constant companion. As with Mr. Snyder and Mr. Tartar, I won't speak for them, but I did want to just reflect on how, over my time in Falls Church, we've made an effort to, in some ways, bring the city back to where it used to be. You know, we used to have a downtown grocery through the mid-'80s until Grand Union closed, and it took us 30 years to replace that with the Harris Teeter project. We used to have a big box retail in Sims until that closed, and we were able to replace it with BJ's, which was going to be a car lot if we hadn't found a way to bring in a retail operator. And now the theater is before us. We used to have the State. I went to movies at the State. We used to have Jefferson right over the hill on Annandale. I went to movies there. Both those closed. The common thread through all three of those examples I've cited is there's been public involvement. Obviously, the Potomac tract was bought by the EDA and held and land banked until it was put into the Harris Teeter property. The BJ's store came in with a revenue agreement along the lines of what we're discussing here, and this theater comes to us with a revenue agreement that hopefully will yield substantial income if it's successful for both the operator and the city. So I guess I'm just asking, appealing to my colleagues to join arms and express unanimity of purpose here, that we don't want to be a city where you have to get in the car and drive somewhere to do what it is that you can't do in Falls Church, whether it's go to the grocery, we've solved that, or shop at a store like BJ's instead of having to go to Pentagon City for Costco, or finally go to the movies instead of having to go to Angelica or Tyson's. So I'm going to support this, and I appreciate the comments that have been made by others that indicate that they will too. Thank you.
All right, other comments? Okay, I'll make a few quickly. Mr. Shields, you know off the top of your head what the revenue is from this project, what's estimated to be?
We have the fiscal impact projection. Mr. Fuller, do you want to speak to that? Or I've got it in front of me.
If you got it in front of you, just tell us.
Okay. So the original fiscal impact analysis was for a range of a net annual fiscal impact of $1,758,000 to $2,094,000. And so that's net of the expenses of government services, including educational services for students that live in the project. So with the added meals tax reduction, that range would be reduced by $126,000. And the reason that the reduction is $126,000 as opposed to $150,000 is that original fiscal impact model was a little bit lower than the full amount of this incentive. So the net effect of this agreement is a reduction of net fiscal impact of $126,000.
So what is the current net fiscal impact again?
$1,631,000 to $1,967,000.
And what was it prior, the prior use, what was that at? In other words, before this got torn down and all that, do you know what the number was?
The net, I don't have that number in front of me, but I can check.
Okay. I mean, I think the bottom line is it was fairly de minimis before this project came along, and that this project, even with incentives and the like is going to generate substantial tax revenue and actually help reduce taxes for our citizens throughout the community. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, yes.
Yeah, so maybe even by 3 or possibly even 4 cents, if you consider $2 million or thereabouts of net tax revenue compared to maybe 300,000 or 400,000 that the plumbing supply house was doing.
I think that's right.
Okay. So I guess the bottom line is what I would say to folks who say, why do you offer incentives? I would say it's to bring economic development to the city. It's to enliven this city. It's to make this community not a bedroom community, but to have commerce and business and things that might not otherwise show up at our doorstep. As Phil had mentioned, it's to give us a complete community where we can walk to entertainment, where we can walk to the grocery store, where we can walk to services and buy things, and not just be a bedroom community where you drive someplace else. And so the movie theater, I think, will draw people in. People will come from other places and spend money in Falls Church. And whether that's at the movie theater or whether that's the restaurant next door to the movie theater or the grocery store a block away from the movie theater, people will come to the city through new development like this and spend money and have a good time, as will our community and our citizens. So I think bringing in business like this is important and critical to our community, and I think it's a good investment in ourselves and our community. So my hesitation, though, is that over these past years, things have not gotten completed. They've gotten started, and so a lot of these incentives we're hearing about are starting things. Hey, sign a lease. Get a building permit, start doing improvements, but they're not geared towards finishing things. They're geared towards starting things. I want to see things get done, and that's my frustration with this project and this development. A year ago or thereabouts, we saw on the front page of the newspaper, these new restaurants are going to be opening shortly. Well, they're not open yet. And, maybe they're coming soon, but that's sort of what we've been seeing a lot of is coming soon, which is frustrating to me. I was very heavily involved in this project and helping hopefully shape it to kind of what it is now in the movie theater part especially. And so it's very frustrating to me to see it kind of always be a step away. And so I'm hopeful that with tonight's action that we will in fact be getting these things in the near future. But I am wary, I am frustrated, and I'm hopeful that in fact these restaurants and these other things will be opening in the near future. But they have always been one step away, a glimmer or a twinkle in someone's eye, and not really come about. So I will support this. I will vote for this because I want to see this happen. And I think this is an important part of making this a complete community where our kids can walk once again, as they did many years ago, to the State Theater, walk to a new theater, and walk to restaurants and get ice cream and all the other things that are going to happen in this development and the other developments we've worked very hard on these past few years. But I would just say to you, let's get these places opened up and not just be kind of a step away. And so I look forward to those things happening. And I guess that's all I have to say right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We will have a housekeeping item once the motion is placed on the floor and seconded. We just want to make sure this doesn't have to come back again. So if the motion is made and seconded, if you don't mind recognizing me, I can tell you what the language needs to be inserted.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, let's do that.
Okay, thank you. I share your hopefulness, Mr. Mayor. I move to adopt TR 22-35.
Second.
Ms. Leon in the second, and now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. In reading this again, we wanted to make sure, as I mentioned a moment ago, that this doesn't need to come back again. There needs to be language in the resolution that actually addresses the amusement arcade, that it remains a prohibited use, but permitted as an accessory use. So I'll get the exact language to the clerk, but if the maker and the seconder will treat it as a friendly amendment, the language we're proposing is to add at line 422 on page 10 of the staff report in the resolution. The voluntary concession labeled Voluntary Concession 3, Prohibited Uses, is amended to provide that amusement arcade remains a prohibited use except as an accessory to another permitted use. That language was missing from the resolution. We just want to make sure that didn't need to come back.
I see, and that's part of the resolution, not part of the voluntary concession.
It's both, but it's in the voluntary concessions, but you're approving the resolution this evening, and there's an argument that it wouldn't be crystal clear, so I want to make sure that the language is in both, just to make sure, just like we made the amendment to insert the seating language and the certificate of occupancy language from earlier.
All right, and to your earlier point, I presume you're fine with that change as it
Correct.
is a voluntary concession. All right, so
Mr.
we have a
Mayor?
motion. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, I have another question. It's really about the second action, which is the development agreement. Should I ask that question now or wait till that comes up for a vote?
So I guess I would say, if it's relevant to the first action, I guess I would say make it now. If it's not, then I'd say let's get through the vote and then go on to that.
Okay, that's
All
fine.
right. So we have a motion that's been seconded. We have a friendly amendment that I presume by the maker and the second.
The maker of the motion accepts the friendly amendment.
That's just the second.
Second, yep.
Okay. So we have a motion that's been amended that's now before council. And I'll go ahead and ask the city clerk to go ahead and call that vote.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
All right. Now it's to your second question or comment.
Yeah, line 129 in the economic development agreement, and the mayor discussed that a minute ago. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but what the effect of that says is that with these additional proposed incentives, and by the way, that does take money away from taxes that would otherwise be paid and would reduce the need to pay other taxes on behalf of our taxpayers. But let's leave that one aside. So are we saying that these additional, quote, incentives, end quote, will actually reduce the overall positive tax revenue of this project? Is that what we're saying in line 129?
Yes, that is the fact.
And do these numbers, the base numbers, assume a movie theater and income from a movie theater?
So
In other words, what I'm trying to understand is what that line 129 really means.
the base numbers assumed a $340,000 deduction for the movie theater. When the analysis was done, there wasn't the meals tax component, so there was $139,000 net on the meals tax. That's now been reduced by by the amount. That amount has been reduced by everything other than the $10,000 that the city keeps.
But what I'm trying to establish is, did the baseline number assume a movie theater?
Yes, it did. With the old 2016 agreement, that's what the baseline number assumed.
Right, okay. So I guess the argument would be, yeah, we're reducing the overall amount, but because we're getting a movie theater, that actually supports the baseline. In other words, what I'm trying to understand is, what's the real-world impact of these additional incentives, assuming that we get a movie theater?
So one way to look at it, the real-world impact is that we believe it's needed in order to have the theater happen. So that's the reason it's before the city council. But in all, it's a $490,000 incentive program over 30 years with a 3% escalator. So the $340,000 for the theater and the $150,000 for the meals tax together is $490,000.
And so when you're done with these incentives, they reduce the net revenue of the project.
Again, relative to the numbers that I've shown, it already assumed the $340,000, so it's not a reduction to that. In absolute terms, it is that reduction. But in terms of what we presented back when this was originally voted upon, the delta is $126,000, as we noted earlier.
Okay. I guess the net effect of these additional incentives is to reduce the overall value of the project.
All right, so unless there's any other questions, let's go ahead and get a motion as to the second item.
Mr. Mayor, move to adopt TR 22-36.
Second.
Hiscott on the second. Any additional comment? All right, Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Abstain.
And Mayor Charter.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0 with one abstention. Thank you.
All right, so look, we've got a couple of items to go through still. It's 10 o'clock. We can take a recess, but I prefer to power through if we can do that quickly. All right, let's go ahead. Thank you, congratulations. We look
Thank
forward
you
to the
all.
movie theater opening and restaurants as well.
Thank you. Have a great night.
All right, let's move on to the next item, Madam Clerk.
Yes, we have first reading of TO 22-17, ordinance to amend Chapter 16, Finance, Article 3 of the Code of the City of Falls Church to include an electronic summons fee.
Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor, and members of council. What is proposed is a $5 charge that would be imposed on moving violations in the City of Falls Church. It would be similar to a court fee, and this would be an electronic summons fee to help mitigate the costs for the city to move to a paperless ticketing system. That paperless ticketing system is estimated to cost about $130,000 to implement. It will be a convenience for the public, but it also will improve internal operations, which is the reason we are considering moving in that direction. That decision, however, will be subject to a budget discussion that is coming up in October. The last thing I will note is that the estimated revenues from this are rather modest. I think they're in the neighborhood of under $6,000 per year, but again, it will help mitigate the cost of making this conversion to a paperless system.
Any questions? Ms. Conley?
Mr. Shields, I think I remember from the work session that this is also to have us be in parity with Arlington, and it was requested by the court clerk.
That is true. The clerk of court has to kind of differentiate between Arlington and the city, and they would prefer if we were all doing the same thing.
All right, anything else? Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
I move to adopt TO 22-17.
Do we have a
Oh, it's a first reading.
What do I say?
It's
Move to grant first reading to TO 22-17. Schedule second reading and final consideration for October 24th, 2022, and advertise the same according to law.
Second.
All right, Ms. Leon on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Charter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to business not on the agenda. Standing regional committees. Council member requests. Ms. Conley.
As the council liaison to Mary Riley Stiles Public Library Board, I just want to make sure everyone is aware that the library is going through a strategic planning process right now for the next 5 years. There are several surveys available. One is using pictures so young children can take the survey, and another one uses words for people over the age of 6th grade. So please take that survey and share it with as many people as you know. And the second thing is they're going to have a series of focus groups next week. I believe it is Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And Jenny Carroll, the library director, said that the clerk will be sending out invitations for council members to join any of those sessions. I think they have space for 20 to 30 people per session to answer focus group questions about the library. So all of this will help advise the library as they go forward into the next 5 years. And it looks like the clerk has something to add.
Yes, and they are planning a specific session for board and commission members and council members, so there'll be that option, but if you can't make that, there are other ways to participate. So that'll go out tomorrow to you all.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Snyder?
What is the process that we're following for the selection of the full-time city attorney?
Mr. Shields?
So the process is going to be interviews that will be with the full city council, and I think those are being scheduled very soon.
I just heard, so GovOps has been taking the lead on the process side. I just heard from HR that they're scheduling the top 4 that I've heard from members of council on in the next couple of weeks.
So are we going to interview all the candidates or the overall council or?
All of council is part of the discussion, part of the meetings.
Okay, okay.
All right, other comments, questions? Anything else? We got approval of minutes from July 25th, 2022. Mr. Duncan?
Mr. Mayor, line 64 should say none, not non. Line 112 should say provided. And I haven't found anything else, unless others have comments. I move to adopt the meetings of the July 25th, 2022 meeting as revised.
All right. Ms. Hiscott on the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Anything else anyone wants to say before we adjourn?
We are in person tomorrow for the mayor's meeting, right?
Yeah. All right, anything else? Any final words? All right, let's do it. We're adjourned. What's that? Yeah, I know exactly.